Thank you very much, Phil. It's good to see all of you today. So I'm joining you from Bath, near Bristol, but I used to work at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and this is a report on part of a project that I did about using video annotated peer feedback in health education at the university. I used it on a program focusing on healthcare education with a group of about 30 in-service professionals and their instructor. What they had to do was carry out independent research and then share their findings in a short presentation. Traditionally, they did that in person, but they tried doing it differently using video annotation to give feedback on recorded presentations. What is a video annotation tool? Well, it's a way for students to record themselves using their own device, take part in peer feedback asynchronously online, and then add time-stamped comments at different points in the recording to take part in peer feedback. So you can see how it works. You can stop the recording and post comments and take part in a conversation around communicative practice. And this is from an earlier project that I did looking at optometry education, hence the title of the presentation. But I wanted to focus on a more recent intervention. In the literature on video-based peer feedback, it talks a lot about the role of cognitive scaffolding. There's a debate as to whether video feedback is more effective when it's done in person with the instructor there or with students doing it online, and also around the role of grades and motivation. When it comes to using a video annotation tool like we did, the literature talks a lot about the specificity of comments that's made possible using the tool, the fact that it can be more efficient, and it can also be more interactive because it can be less face-threatening with fewer barriers to collaboration when students do this kind of task online. I wanted to focus on socio-cultural factors, and I wanted to look at what students actually do using the tool rather than just self-reported data. And I wanted to carry out a systemic analysis to see how students' use of the video annotation tool changes peer feedback. And I wanted to see what kind of contradictions there are in this approach. So I used a theoretical framework that combined activity theory with criteria such as interactivity, efficiency, serendipity, cost, and failure. I think these criteria are really interesting. And I used Engerstrom's notion of expansive learning, which looks at how we question and analyze and then model new practices and then look at how they're implemented and then use that experience to keep improving the approach. And I used a mixed methods approach, so I combined instructor interviews with student surveys. And I also looked at the annotations that students made using the tool, focusing not just on the number of annotations, but the quality of them. And I also got data from the platform, looking at how long students spent using it and how many videos they viewed. And when I looked at the historical activity system, I found that there were three main contradictions. First of all, there were very limited opportunities for educational innovation. Students just copied the case studies they were given by the instructor. They didn't come up with their own ideas. Then, students had quite an instrumental attitude to peer assessment. They focused on the score that students were giving each other rather than the comments on their presentations. So there was this contradiction here. And there were also unexpected time pressures which meant that it wasn't possible for all students to give a presentation in one lesson. In the new system that we planned, the instructors and I, we introduced a new tool, the video annotation tool, and we also introduced scaffolding to help students develop their own original innovations. The assessment became more meaningful because students were graded on participating in the activity, and they were given lots of choice around how they commented and who they commented on. And it changed from being a synchronous in-class activity to an asynchronous activity. So students reviewed at least 5 recorded presentations, and they had more time to evaluate and develop their own innovation during class. This shows what students' annotations look like. So you can see there was quite a high level of interactivity. This is a map of students' interactions with different people in the group. So almost all students commented. They posted a lot of comments. Many of them exceeded the required number of posts. Interactions were really meaningful. They were more open, with lots of examples of students replying and taking part in conversations around their presentations. They felt there was more time to think and understand. And interestingly, the interactions took place not just online during the tool, but in a hybrid way, with students also taking part in conversations in synchronous classes and also meeting in person to discuss their work. But you can also see that the pattern of commenting was not equally distributed. So some students got more comments than others. It was an efficient process because students really developed their thinking through peer discussion and peer learning. They felt there was a lot of value to what they were doing because it linked to the final research project. It was more flexible, and they felt that being able to post timestamp comments helped them be clearer and more specific and contextualized. Just at the bottom of the screen here is an example of a student comment, and the way that I measured the specificity of the comments was to count the number of units of feedback. So here, the student talked about the behavior and also the effect of communication. In a higher level comment, they also talked about the motive for what students were doing, and they made suggestions linked to learning goals. So all of this helped me measure the quality of student comments, and this was a lot higher than using a traditional in-person presentation approach. Students spent a lot of time on task reviewing each other's presentations, and they also generally came back to look at their own video to see what feedback they'd received from their peers. In terms of serendipity, students were a lot more motivated than the instructors expected because they got to interact more with their peers and the content. Because they could choose who to comment on, they tended to look at all the videos briefly and then choose purposefully which ones they would give feedback on. They took part in a lot of discussions in class about their feedback without being asked. And there was this pattern of the feedback moving from online into the classroom. And it became much more of a dialogue than traditional unidirectional feedback that you would get with an in-person presentation. There were 2 obvious costs in terms of instructors' time giving feedback and managing the activity, and students giving feedback. But some students actively chose to spend a lot more time than they needed to on the activity, which shows that they found it very motivating. It was an active choice. And generally, the longer students spent viewing and commenting on the videos, the more interactive they were, the better the quality of their comments. And even though it involved a lot of time costs online, it freed up a lot of class time for more interaction and discussion. So it became much more active than the traditional approach. Two failures that emerged from using the annotation tool. First of all, it didn't notify students when somebody had posted on their video. So some of them didn't realize they'd been given feedback. So that's why a number of them didn't view their own video again. And also, it's quite a lean medium. The video annotation tool only allows text. There are no emoticons or images or audio or video comments. So some students found that less motivating. Looking at the remediated or the new system, there were still two major issues. The shortcomings of the tool that I mentioned, but this actually led students to talk more about their videos in class to make up for the leanness of the medium. And also, students had different expectations of peer feedback. So this meant that comments were not very equally distributed, and some comments were less helpful than others. So what the instructors agreed would be important would be to provide more cognitive scaffolding, more exemplars, not only of student presentations, but also the kind of feedback that they wanted students to give. But they felt that not providing rubrics was the right thing to do because it gave students more flexibility about how they commented. So in conclusion, this kind of approach used activity theory to see how the annotation tool really changed the system of peer feedback. It suggests how the activity can be consolidated and improved, and it adds to important bodies of knowledge, looking at what students actually do with technology, how scaffolding can benefit students in giving peer feedback, how in fact giving students a grade for the work might not really improve their motivation because many of them went way beyond what was required, regardless of the grade. And also the fact that we can combine in-person and online approaches to feedback using an annotation tool. And I'm really keen to kind of study the design and implementation of this type of approach in different contexts. I've looked at it in a number already, but I'm keen to explore it more at the University of Bristol and hopefully with other people here who have an interest in this kind of approach. So I'm happy to share the slides. There's some links to the literature on video annotation and peer feedback, and a bit more on activity theory. But at this point, I'd be really happy to take a couple of questions.